Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast. Before we begin, I'd like to review some quick housekeeping items. Today's webinar audio is streamed to your computer speakers. If you need technical assistance with the web interface or audio, please reach out to us using the chat window. You can submit your questions at any time during the presentation using the chat window, and we will answer as many of them as possible at the end. If we don't get to answer your questions, we will follow up via email. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email following the webinar with a link to the recording. We encourage you to share this link with your colleagues who weren't able to make it today. Your presenters today are Bill Hammond and Dan Sims. Bill, over to you.
Thanks a lot, and thanks everyone out there for joining us today for our topic on migrating IBM to the cloud and just looking at some of the pros and cons. I want to thank Dan for joining me as well. He'll be picking up some of the content here about halfway through as we wander through the slides. But this webinar topic is really born out of a lot of conversations that we have with customers that are considering what it looks like to move to the cloud. Should they move to the cloud? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? What are they really going to have to go through? So in order to kind of help frame some of these discussions, we thought this discussion Dan and I wanted to have with you today would be a good idea. And the way we kind of decided to structure how we're going to talk about things today, we want to talk a little bit about where are you at when you're considering a move to the cloud. What are the kind of things that might sound familiar to you that's driving you to do it? What are you hearing? What are you trying to get out of it? What advantage do you think you're going to get? What things are you worried about? What are some of the negatives that maybe you're worried about? Maybe we can help you think through and maybe allay some of those. And then we'll talk about the actual process and a little bit about how precisely it could actually help you with that migration to the cloud. Because let's face it, one of the special issues here with IBM is the critical nature of the applications and the data that live on your power systems that run IBM. These aren't systems that it's painless to just take offline and take a week to migrate all the data to a cloud, and how do I get the data up there and all that kind of stuff. So this is particularly a pointed conversation for people that are running IBM with that mission critical nature of the applications and the business critical kind of stuff they're doing with it. And then Dan's going to talk a little bit about operating those power systems in the cloud. And this will expand the discussion a little bit beyond just IBM, but also include AIX, which is something we see increasingly on power systems, having both IBM and AIX workloads running on that platform. And then we should have some time at the end for a few questions, and Dan and I'll try to give some answers to you. And I will preface it by saying, we'll get to a few of them. We likely won't get to all the questions, but if you do want to put those questions in the Q&A, we will get answers to you even after the fact individually. So I encourage you to type those in and ask us anything that you want to, and we'll try to get to some of them at the end. All right, with that is a bit of a preamble here. Let's start talking about that what I mentioned, the considering a move to the cloud. What are the kind of things that are likely going on in your mind, in your company's mind, your department's mind, your manager's mind about doing it? So there's a lot of different things that could be causing you to think about the migration to the cloud. Certainly, cloud's not a new concept. I don't mean to imply that this is some brand new technology that's unproven, but it is the uptake on the IBM side of things is really just starting to gain momentum in the last year or so, where the cloud has become a real alternative mode of deployment for IBM workloads. And customers are getting really creative with how they're doing it. And it's usually not, one or the other. It's not like everything's going to move to the cloud or nothing's going to move to the cloud. There's usually a sort of a hybrid approach to it, and there's different ways that people want to structure their particular IT environments to do that. And a lot of times IBM is needing to follow corporate mandates about how that happens. So a lot of the commonality here on this slide of these things that are driving that migration to the cloud, a lot of these aren't really specific to IBM. In fact, I don't think that any of them necessarily are only specific to IBM, but these are the drivers that people are looking at, companies are looking at, our customers are looking at that are, starting these conversations. So, moving to new hardware is a big one actually in IBMI. We all know Power 10s are out there now. It's pretty impressive performance, and so a lot of people are looking at their Power 7s or Power 8s and want to go to 10. Maybe they skip 9, or maybe they're at 7 and there's 8 and 9 and go all the way to 10. We see all kinds of different combinations there. But that move to new hardware makes you think, if I've got to migrate to a new hardware box, maybe now's the time to think about moving my workloads into the cloud to try to take advantage of some of these benefits. There's a generally accepted belief, and frankly, it's not true in all cases, but there's a generally accepted belief that there's money to be saved by moving to the cloud. The flexibility, the elasticity of how you can set up workloads in there, all those things can lead to lowering costs for your IBMI environment and your IT, environment in general. Increasing collaboration maybe across the business with non-IBMI systems, being able to make product or workloads and applications and data available to people in the cloud makes that data in some ways can be possibly more accessible for round the clock, and just different benefits that you can see there. Probably one of the big ones that you're thinking about is the flexibility and agility capability that this gives you. If you've got a time of year, for example, seasonality where you need more capacity or more performance, you can easily scale that up in the cloud without having to necessarily buy new hardware to do that. There's ways to use the benefits of the cloud and the elasticity of the cloud to give you that flexibility and really help you solve short-term problems, and then not have to live with it forever. You can spin up that extra capacity and back it back down. Security, and this is an interesting. I think there's some people that will argue that you can increase the security of your data, your applications, the accessibility of your things by doing the cloud thing right. But there's probably just as many people that would argue that the cloud actually makes you more of a target from a security standpoint. You've got it out there outside of your four walls, outside of your data center. So there's this is one of those arguments could be made on both sides of it. I mean, we tend to think that you just need to be very concerned about security as you're making that move to the cloud. But, there are vulnerabilities that you are creating. You need to understand those. But cloud can certainly help, and done properly, cloud can be a very, very secure environment. And that can drive things like, remote workforces. People, and this gets back to the collaboration and flexibility. People can maybe work from locations that they couldn't work from previous if they had to log into a data center via a local connection, so having to be in the office and those kind of things. You can actually reduce the size of your IT infrastructure. What you have on-prem, if you will, or on premises, and be able to leverage that, whether it's public cloud or whatever capability that you can take advantage of. Another advantage of the cloud is, being able to have everything be up to date. And sometimes your cloud provider will do this for you, but certainly you can do it yourself, keeping all the PTS and all the operating system upgrades and things like that up to date, so you can always make sure that your environment and your applications are running on the most up-to-date software. And Dan's going to talk a little bit about this too, but the cloud offers some interesting capabilities in terms of backup and DR, and how you're actually able to use, the combination of having your data on site. Now it's up in the cloud. Can I back it up? Where can I make it accessible if I need to recover? All those kind of things. It opens up some unique opportunities to actually improve your backup and DR. And then the other piece is, the predictability really of the pricing model. If you have to go out, if you have to solve a problem every time by buying new hardware to increase your capacity, that can be a big lumpy kind of, and maybe potentially unplanned for expense. In the cloud, you can sort of flatten it out. You will pay for an increase or pay for a short-term capacity bump, but you don't have to keep it going. You can actually, back it back down or back it out afterwards and go back to your other, spend level. So you can have a more appropriate and a more friendly budgetary sort of approach to your IT spend by using the cloud. So again, what's driving this migration? Why are people looking at the cloud? These are all the things that cloud has always sort of promised, and they all do play into the IBM I and the Power Systems space as well. So once you kind of evaluated this, as some of these options are, or some of these benefits are going to be good options for you. This is what I want to take advantage of. You start to have to ask yourself, what are the pros and what are the cons? And I think, I touched on some of these in the last slide, but obviously I think the top of everybody's list always tends to be the cost savings. Moving to the cloud is going to save money. And that can be true. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes you find out that, you need to reconfigure things, you need to change. So generally people are looking at cost benefits as one of the drivers for taking them to the cloud. Scalability, I've talked about this already, that you can, expand and sort of contract as much as you need to in a more flexible way than you can by, purchasing your own hardware or expanding your own hardware. Accessibility, this is the concept I talked about earlier with, people being able to access the workloads and the applications from wherever they need to be. Having those automatic updates, in some cases being done by the cloud provider. Reliability and collaboration. Those are the things that people really cite. When I look at different surveys, look at different publications, these are the ones that rise to the top about why cloud is a benefit for a lot of people. Those same studies will also point out some of the things on the right-hand side, the cons. I mentioned the security thing, and I think we all need to understand that, when you move your data outside of your four walls, outside of your data center, there's a higher degree of vulnerability. We think it's manageable, it's able to be mitigated, done properly, but you do have to think about security in sort of a different, more expanded way when you move things to the cloud. So you definitely want to keep security in mind. It's not a reason not to do it, but it's a consideration when you do it. Another one that people cite is the idea of vendor lock-in. That when I pick a cloud provider now, I've migrated my data out to this particular provider, or I've created the cloud environment myself in my own private niche. But in general, it does kind of make a commitment to that, and there's an element of now it's going to be a pain in the neck to undo that and pick up with someone else. So you do kind of pick a horse, and you're locked into a certain extent. You don't have the full control that you have when the IBM Power System is sitting inside your data center, and you have physical access. You have 24/7 access to it. You've got some level of limited control. This is all dependent on your relationship with your provider. There's different ways you can engage with them and different opportunities there. But it can be something to consider about, how often do I need to actually physically get to the machine? Do I ever need to do that? Things like that. And there's hidden costs that people haven't thought of. One of the ones that we've actually seen with people is that the bandwidth requirements that all of a sudden become necessary that weren't considered appropriately, and they end up with the disconnect of, geez, my applications aren't going to support the kind of performance I need when I run them in the cloud, and I get all these benefits of accessibility and scalability and all that kind of stuff. But if my performance isn't keeping up and I have to spend more for my pipeline or my bandwidth, that may be a challenge as well. So sometimes those hidden costs can hit you. I think if you've done a lot of pre-planning and a lot of due diligence, I think you can minimize those as well. There are compliance considerations. There are some countries and some industries where you simply cannot move your data into a public space like that, public cloud. There's restrictions from a compliance standpoint, and it's not all healthcare data, but there's data in the healthcare space. There's data in the financial services space. Some countries around the world will not allow you to have that data outside of your control, if you will. So, you can be outside of one of your compliance mandates if you don't consider the cloud appropriately. So those are the kind of things that people tend to balance and worry about when they're thinking about that move to the cloud. For IBM specifically, again, a lot of reasons to do it. A lot of reasons for migrating. There's actually an expanding amount of options on how to do this. You don't have to build it yourself. There's providers out there that'll host your system, and you can get the data and your applications out there. There are public cloud providers, and we work with virtually all of them, IBM, Google. We have a whole partner network of people doing this. AWS, there's many different options now for IBM workloads in the cloud. And so that's been one of the things that is a little later catching up in some of the other platforms. It used to be there wasn't a lot of options for it. Tremendous amount of options. If you want to move IBM workloads into a cloud environment, that's available. Again, I kind of pointed this out earlier, but the inflection point of what you're upgrading your Power Systems hardware, that can be a time to really think about, hey, if I'm going to do that, should I be doing that in conjunction with a move to running that hardware in the cloud or running on that new hardware in the cloud? Another thing that will drive this is, and again, it's fundamental element here. It's about cost, but growing business demand. I've got more and more demand. It's going to be easier for me to serve that demand in terms of bandwidth and in terms of transaction processing and things in a cloud environment where I can more flexibly expand my CPW in that environment. And then, it was actually, a long time coming for Power 10. And so a lot of people that are on Power 7 and Power 8 hardware have been waiting a long time to maybe make that move. And some companies, make a move every time there's a new Power platform they upgrade. Other companies don't do it every time. Maybe do it every other time or every third time. So there's definitely some pent-up demand in the IBM space for a move to Power 10 and all the benefits that it brings. And that's the time, as we pointed out, when you're leveraging that new hardware, but that kind of aging Power 7 and Power 8 hardware and some of the support from IBM that can be expiring in some of those spaces, it's a reason to really think about the migration to the cloud. But as many benefits as I can talk about as, getting to the cloud will provide you with, the actual act of getting there can be a challenge. And that's kind of what I'm setting up. We'll talk about this in the next section. But, you want to be able to make sure that you can justify that investment, because moving to the cloud is not necessarily free. It's going to maybe take an investment to get there. Invest some money to save some money is kind of the model that you'd probably be looking at there. And then just understanding the scale of what the applications you're moving, the amount of data you're going to move, the transaction processing volume that you're going to have in there. And, a lot of that can be complex and needs to be thought through and considered so you set up the cloud environment correctly and you have the environment you need to support what your business needs once you move it to the cloud. So how do you understand all that stuff, and how do you get comfortable that now's not only the time to do it, but I'm comfortable, I know how to do it, and I've got a plan for if something doesn't go perfectly, and we all know nothing ever goes perfectly for too long a time. So making sure that you've got a way that you can handle, okay, we've got to stop or back up or whatever. So I have a flexible approach to implementing it. Along those lines, we've done surveys of our customers, and when we ask them about, do you want to migrate and what's keeping you from doing it, you start to see some of these statistics. 60% talk about the concerns about, I hate to do this because I don't have a window that I can just take my systems down and just do this, manually or by myself or without having a huge impact on the business. About half of them spending over 50 hours just to plan and execute a migration. That's over 2 days to execute the migration. That's a long time for them to be down. And some of them, 25%, a little over 25%, said that the migrations took over 100 hours. So now you're talking not just a couple of days, you're talking several days, up to maybe a week of execution of that migration strategy. So that can be a barrier to doing it. Geez, that's going to be painful. I don't even think about all the things I got to worry about if I do that. So that can keep people from even considering doing it. When we actually talked to people had executed migrations, they had some issues. You've got About half of them are saying, it caused at least 6 hours of downtime for them. And a quarter of the people said it was longer than 13 hours. So basically, the better part of a business day to do it. So, and you can do your own calculation, but when you look at the cost of downtime, lost revenue, and all those kind of things, this isn't an insignificant amount of money for a typical IBM customer. This can easily get into hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's something that, when you're considering the migration to that cloud environment, to really be cautious and careful and studious about how you want to do that migration and what you want to do. And about a third of the people that tried to do this themselves ended up with a very serious problem, and most of them then needed to essentially roll back to where they were to get restarted and get the applications going again. So basically, a third of the people trying to do this themselves, because it's not something you do all the time. 31% of the people doing this actually failed at it and had to go back to square one. But that's a scary number as well. A lot of costs for doing this wrong, and I mentioned a lot of them on the previous slide. But there's the obvious ones you see. I mentioned maybe labor costs that you'll lose by having to go back and restart. You might have just expense in terms of downtime and things like that. But security exposure, while you're doing some of this, you don't have the security set up properly, that can be an exposure. The regulatory costs, a lot of times it's not just that you're out of compliance and you get a red flag, it's you're out of compliance and you have a fine to pay. So if you have a problem with your systems and they aren't up and available, that in a lot of compliance worlds is enough to trigger some sort of a fine, because you're a bank and your customers weren't able to get to their account for a period of time. That's in a lot of countries around the world. That's an expense. That's a compliance fine that they'll be issued for that. And we've dealt with customers that had that particular challenge. So there are physical and tangible costs of doing this improperly. So when you consider that move to the cloud, it's not something to be taken lightly. On the other hand, with the right partner, we think we can do this. So when we look at the years that we've been helping people do this, what you want to really do is mitigate that risk, minimize the risk as much as possible prior to actually doing the migration. So understanding what those changes can be, having your new systems and your old systems up and running in parallel, and then as the changes are still being made on the production system, they're being replicated to that new system in real time without you having to move tapes and do things like that. Users continue to work without interruption generally while all this is going on. And then once it's time, everything is synced up between the old and new. Now you cut over to that, and you have a very small window of downtime. Generally, we're talking minutes, where you will take the old system down, and now you're running on the systems in the cloud. So it's a very simplistic way of representing a whole lot of work, a whole lot of planning, and a whole lot of knowledge. But fundamentally, this is the benefit of working with someone who knows how to do these migrations. And the way that we help people do this is with a tool we call Migrate While Active. And essentially, we use our world-class replication technology to sort of empower this. And what it leads to is this near zero downtime when you're migrating, a particular LPAR, let's say, from your on-prem environment into a cloud environment. And even though the LPAR handles a high transaction volume, it continues to handle all that transaction volume while we copy the data up to the cloud, and then we keep it in sync with this real-time migration and help with all the expert capabilities we know about how you want to do this and manage that process, plan the process, and mitigate those risks as much as possible. And we help you, when you engage with us with this Migrate While Active solution we have, to look at your data needs. And, where's the data going to live? Where does it live today? Where does it need to live tomorrow in the cloud? What applications are you running? What bandwidth do they need? Things like that. What are the critical objects for your applications or your company that we need to make sure that we are getting replicated from the original or primary system into the cloud environment as well? One of the unique advantages of using our replication technology to help power this Migrate While Active is some of the benefits that we have with our normal replication can really be important here. hardware and OS independent. So it doesn't matter that you're migrating from a Power 7 server into a Power 10 server with a different operating system. We can handle that. That's not a problem. So you're not having to upgrade your on-prem servers and then try to move to the cloud. So you've got a match of OS and a match of hardware. That's not necessary. So theoretically, you can move your data between virtually any server, any LPARs on those servers. We're not storage dependent either. We're pretty much storage agnostic. So it doesn't matter what kind of storage device, internal storage, SAN, or whatever you have that you've got connected to your IBM I, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, we can work with those storage environments as well. So we can really move you around, if you want to think about that, migrate you from the physical world, the on-prem sort of stuff, into virtualized worlds in your on-prem environment, or a virtualized world in the cloud, or indeed out there in a public cloud environment as well. So the flexibility of having all these different capabilities powered by our real-time applications is really why our active solution is so important. And how does it really work? We just, as it says, enable a synchronized target pre-production. So this target is out there, but we're not running the application. The user not really using it yet. And we migrate the data, and we continue to migrate those changes till we get basically a synced up version of that the original primary system. We're constantly running audits to verify that what's on the primary system is on that secondary system. And, we can actually even practice cutting over. We can test things out on that new system before we cut over and make it live. We don't have to just cross our fingers and say, well, I think it's ready. Let's hope so. Let's, take down the other system and hope we can run on the other. You can test it. And we encourage people to do that kind of thing. And our migration experts, deal with things like that planning I mentioned, which is so important, getting the software installed and configuring, getting the synchronization process both done and the actual point in time where you want to say, okay, we're going to cut over and do that pre-switch testing I talked about, the verification stuff, getting you through that final switch to the point where you're running on that new hardware in the cloud, and then just working with your staff. Our team works with your staff to make sure that we, from soup to nuts, have a successful migration for you and your company, your data. I mentioned it before, but it kind of deserves its own slide. Testing is so critical to this process. It is, the really cornerstone, because you can do everything right, but if you don't test it, you're never going to be sure. And those are that one slide I had with all those percentages of people that had a problem. It's more likely you're going to have a problem than not. So the things you want to be conscious that you're testing, certainly that connectivity and the communications. Can you talk to that box from your remote location or your location? Is everything accessible and connected, and is the replication stream, working fine? You want to make sure that's there. You want to take a look at that security. Like I said, security in the cloud is not something that you're automatically less secure, but you do need to make considerations about where your data is and where it's living. So testing that security before you go live. Doing audits to make sure that the data is truly the same from what it was on the primary system to what it is on the secondary system, or the migrated system is in the same state, that it looks and acts and is ready to behave just like that other system. You want to make sure that not only is the data in that state, but you want to make sure that your applications that use that data are ready to run, and their status is, or excuse me, their state is that they are available. And that application is going to run like it did before. Your users aren't going to experience any problems. You definitely want to test the applications themselves that are going to be running in that cloud environment before you cut over and make sure that that's going to happen. And then it's not a bad idea to use some pilot users. Like, okay, we're going to put some users on this machine, make sure they do everything they normally do, and make sure that experience for those users is as close to where it is the same as what it was before you migrated to the newer system. So those testing elements is not just test to make sure it looks like everything's good. These are specific areas that you want to test, and we can work with you on that as well. So just kind of summing up before I kick it over to Dan, and he talked to you a little bit more about what this actually looks like. Migration to or into the cloud, it can minimize the downtime that a lot of people experience trying to do this migration. The cutover takes minutes, not days, not hours, so you don't have that big downtime window you have to plan for and the costs that you will suffer because of it. That risk factor, we talked in that other slide about how many people actually had problems when they were doing their migration. So in order to make sure you're not one of them, being able to eliminate as much of that risk as possible. And a lot of that comes from what I talked about just a few slides ago about testing things, testing the applications, testing the server, testing the connectivity and the communication between the systems. And then actually, one of the most important things is being able to do this in a way that if you do need to fall back to that original server, you can still do that. It can be quick, easy, and you don't have to suffer a ton of downtime. You aren't dead in the water, as it were. And then just, the flexibility that we provide, or that the cloud really provides in terms of, how you want this information to work in a new environment. The hardware, software storage independence, really critical. You don't have to have an identical server on both sides. It could be different hardware, it could be different OSs, things like that. So that flexibility in how and when you want to be able to do this is a really important element of this as well. So with that as kind of a description of like why people are looking at and how they can do it with this Migrate Active, I wanted to turn it over to Dan to give you a sense of, what does operating in the cloud look like once you have done this move. So Dan, I'll send it over to you.
All right, thanks very much, Bill, and hello to all of you. Thanks for listening to our webinar. And I'm going to talk to you about operating in the cloud today. I'd like to start a little bit. So Bill has given us a lot of information about why people are moving to the cloud and considerations. And one thing I just wanted to point out is that we're speaking broadly about the term cloud, what that actually is. So there's public cloud providers out there, and there's also smaller managed service providers. And, we could be talking about, a combination of those. And so one thing I always like to say, it's kind of funny, is what's the difference between an on-premise situation and the cloud, right? And on-premise, it's my computer, and if it's in the cloud, it's somebody else's, right? So that could be a managed service provider, could be a public cloud operator. So, but let's get into this a little bit. So first of all, some basics about cloud environments. And they are typically virtual environments. So IBM I and AIX is running on virtual LPARs, running on a cloud stack that the provider would provide you. Now, again, I was talking about managed service providers, and they might provide you a turnkey service where you don't have to worry about any of this. They will operate your IBM I on their hardware and manage all of that. Or in the case of a public cloud provider, you might interact with their cloud stack, where you get to set up the how much capacity you're going to need, the memory, and things like that, and add more and more LPARs to it. When you're in the cloud, it's all about the LPAR. It's no longer very much about the hardware. And like I talked about the public cloud provider, you very likely, you won't have access to the hardware. So, and what can actually happen is that the serial number, since it's a virtual LPAR, the serial number may change on you. So your LPAR, your virtual LPAR, could move from one system to another. And some providers will not do that, but other ones will do that. There's a thing called a pinned LPAR or an unpinned LPAR, and that if a pinned LPAR would not move, but an unpinned LPAR very well could move. CL your system, restart it, reboot it, and it could end up on a different serial number. So that's something you could see. And also any kind of hardware devices that you might have become used to use cloud. So you just don't have access to the hardware, the storage typically. You just fire up an LPAR quite easily, actually. I always sometimes laugh. You just need an email address, password, and a credit card, right? And you got an IBM LPAR, an AIX LPAR, and that's a wonderful thing. So making these resources more available to the marketplace. So one thing I will caution you, and Bill probably touched on this very briefly, but performance fundamentals still matter. So you might be running on somebody else's computer in the cloud, right? But the underlying processor and memory, storage resources to be able to support that application. Remember, the application is king, and you got to have the resources to be able to support what that application needs to do. Continuing with the basics, software licensing does need to accommodate cloud operating environments. So I'm talking about our software, and I'm talking about your software. So remember, LPARs are mobile. Live partition mobility events may occur. Physical serial numbers may change. Hardware features will change. So capacity is the new licensing metric. All right. And I just want to take a moment to talk about what we do here at Precisely with our HA product lines, or for Assure Mimics and Assure Itera and Assure Quick EDD to operate in the cloud. We support capacity-based licensing, and we can allow you to go up or down. And we support LPAR-based licensing, and we even do some things like allow grace period. So if that serial number changes, and we support virtual serial number, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So we are well prepared to support these capacity-based situations. We also have some cases where we support SaaS, software as a service type of licensing. So we're ready to go in the cloud here at Precisely. Now, I mentioned virtual serial number. This is a new thing from IBM. And really what it is it allows you to have a serial number at the LPAR level, a globally unique serial number. This never happened before. They just released it. I want to say it was in 2023, but I could be mistaken. Maybe it was the year before, but it's brand new. It's early days on virtual. So you have a globally unique serial number at the LPAR level, and previously it was only globally unique at the hardware level. So you can see in my picture here that you have some LPARs running on physical hardware. So on A1, you have an LPAR running there with a virtual serial number of V01. It's replicating to hardware C1, and it has a virtual serial number of V111, and the same thing on the right-hand side there. So you've got 4 virtual serial numbers there that are globally unique. And so when you move, you can do a live partition mobility situation and move that V01 virtual serial number across to a different hardware, and the serial number did not change. So this is a new thing that you can license to, and software vendors will probably be taking advantage of this. Now, we here at Precisely support licensing at virtual serial number, but we also support working with managed service providers who would have pooled systems, where in that case we would license the physical serial number. So they may choose to offer you virtual serial number, but that's up to them, and we would license them at the physical serial number level. Another thing that's important to think about, and Bill, this actually has to do more with what Bill was talking about with migration, is synced by wire. So because there's not a lot of tape infrastructure out there in the cloud, it might just be better and easier to just push everything through the network. So The thing to understand about IBMI and AIX in the cloud is that LPARs are often scratch loaded with an OS, TR, cum level, and OS maintenance is actually done by the user. So that's an important point, is unless you're working with a managed service provider, if you're working with public cloud, you're responsible for doing the updates on that. Full system restores are going to be a little less. A lot of these cloud providers have a thing called a mass storage device that they would ship to you, and you would do a save and a restore through some kind of virtual tape process. And so you would go ahead and you need to get that LPAR stood up. You need to get the OS and PTF levels that you need to be at. And then you can sync it through the wire and bring everything over through the wire. So that's something to keep in mind. And one thing I just wanted to point out that we've done in our products here, specifically Mimics, is we've made a lot of synchronization improvements designed for syncing through the wire. We have sync on start, where it will take a library and you can configure it, and when you start the data group, it will go ahead and synchronize that thing, and you can generally walk away from that and just let it come back in an hour or tomorrow, and it should be all synced up for you. We've also added encryption of data across the network, and we've had this for remote journaling for some time, but we're also adding it to the regular transmission of all. So you'll have encryption of all data. So that's pretty important stuff through syncing on the wire. And so I'm sort of getting to my summary slide here. And, you know, we are the logical replication solution is highly flexible. And that includes both AIX and IBMI workloads. And so you can, you might very well be on a on-premise topology right now with, let's say, IBMI 7.3, and you want to go to the cloud, and that might be IBMI 7.4 or 7.5. That's no problem. You might have a mixture of internal storage. You might have external storage, and you're going to the cloud, and you don't really care what storage they have as long as it works well. That's no problem at all. It's all agnostic. You don't have to sit there and line up the hardware to make sure that it's all going to work. You're freed from doing that. So logical replication can bridge that. And of course, we can do cloud to cloud. We can do cloud to ground if you need to. You can do from one cloud provider to another if you need to. You know, that we expect to see that in a few years as this marketplace matures. So logical replication gives you that flexibility to replicate between the AIX and IBMI environments that work best for you and your budget. One thing I heard Bill mention, I actually kind of forgot about mentioning it, is backups. And so many people do side backups, so they can do a full backup of the data without any kind of disruption to their production system. The beauty of logical replication with Mimics, for example, is that you can very easily end the Mimic supply jobs and release all locks. You don't have open commitment control cycles to deal with, no users, and you can do a backup on that data. It works very, very well. We have many customers doing that. You can flash copy your target side copy of data, and you don't have dirty flash copies if you want to go that route. All of those concepts apply in the cloud as well. Okay, you might not have physical tape devices, but you might have virtual tape devices now, which are the same. You might have, some of your cloud provider might support flash copy. So you might look at that too. So backup is the same in the cloud as it is other places, just without the physical tape devices, and it's a great solution. And with that, Bill, I'm going to turn it back to you to to see if there's any questions on the queue.
Thanks, Dan. We do have a few that we can take a look at and answer here. The first one that caught my eye, it sort of is related to what you were just talking about. The question is Migrate while active that I was talking about only available to existing Mimics customers? And the short answer is no, it's available to everybody. And the bit longer answer really is what we do for a customer who doesn't already have Mimics installed, on these machines or at all in their environment. We can work with them on a temporary subscription license where we use the real-time replication capabilities of Mimics to do some of what Dan just described for you, to get that data from one place to another, ground to cloud, cloud to cloud, back and forth. So we do it on a temporary subscription basis. It's also not uncommon to have us engage with a customer on a migrate while active scenario, and once they see the advantages and the capability really of Mimics and the ability to move this data around and keep things in sync, that they do become a Mimics customer. But it's certainly not a prerequisite or a requirement for people that are thinking about moving to the cloud. And they want to look at the migrate while active capability that we can help them with. We solve that need for non-Mimics customers by giving them a subscription license to use as part of the engagement to do the migrate while active. I don't know, Dan, if there's anything else you wanted to add to the answer, but that's how I would address it.
Nope, that's a good one.
Okay. Here's one I'll throw at you, Dan. Do I need to have physical access to the hardware to use the migrate while active when I'm using migrate while active to the cloud?
Yeah, so you're not going to probably get it anyway, even if you wanted it. As I said, the hardware is, you don't have to deal with the hardware in the cloud. That's one of the beauties of the cloud is, so you go into their cloud stack and you create an LPAR, and it's your LPAR and you can start working with it. The networking has to be worked out, and your cloud provider would work with you on that, make sure that's working nicely. But no, you don't need the hardware. So you can, once you got the networking, you can start synchronizing that LPAR.
Cool. And this is a really good question. What does it look like if I do try to migrate and I do have a problem? I'll answer the first, and I'll give Dan a chance to expand a little bit. But the first thing I would say is that it's one of the reasons you want to work with people that know how to do this and can help you mitigate those risks, like I talked about, because you don't want to have that problem. You want to do all the tests of all those different systems before you do the cutover. But what it does look like, if you do run into something like that, is it's very much like it looks like in a high availability environment where you're doing a switch. So you would essentially try to switch to the new box, or the cloud box in this case. And if you ran into a problem, you would switch back to the original. And the original is still there with all the transactions it had, and you can sell back to that box. And that's a relatively simplistic answer, Dan. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, that's the right answer, but I will add some things to that. And I've done a lot of migrations or thought about it over the years, and actually been part of many live cutovers, and the planning is everything, and Bill covered that pretty well. But I always tell people to watch your variables. And what do I mean by that? Well, are you doing an OS version jump? Like, are you going 7.3 to 7.4, 7.2 to 7.4? That's variable. And just by the fact that you're going to the cloud, that's a huge variable, right? You're going on new hardware, you're going to new networks, new operating environments, new. And of course, you're going to test all that out. But as you probably know, it's sometimes very difficult to really do load testing, real world load testing, until you go live. So it's critically important that you have a go back plan, especially if there's a lot of variables. But you should always have a go back plan. So you can cut over to the cloud and you're running there. And if you find out, you know what, my application, this is just not cutting the mustard, then you can do a controlled switch back and sort of figure out what the issues are. Okay, so it's highly advantageous to use logical replication to give you that go back option.
Great. All right, well, I'm going to wrap it up now. If there's any questions we didn't get to here, we will definitely follow up with each of you individually. I appreciate the time you took today to listen to Dan and I and our discussion here on moving up to the cloud. And if you have any additional questions, certainly reach out to Precisely. You can go on our website and contact us button there. You can get to a Precisely expert, and we can help you with anything related to this topic. I want to thank Dan for helping me with today's presentation. And finally, thanks to all of you out there again for the time you took to listen to us today. And I want to wish you a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.